Shitey. She's a pig. They laughed at Obese Girl. Then Mountain Man showed them what happens to bullies. The autumn wind carried the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves through the settlement of Copper Ridge, nestled in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains in 1814. Sarah Whitmore pressed herself against the rough wooden wall of Patterson's General Store, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. The laughter still rang in her ears, cruel and sharp as broken glass. "Look at her waddle!" Thomas Brennan's voice carried across the muddy main street, like a pig heading to slop. His friends, sons of the settlement's founding families, joined in the mockery. Sarah's cheeks burned with humiliation as she clutched her basket tighter, the flour and cornmeal inside suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. At 17, she had grown accustomed to the taunts, but they never hurt any less. "My pa says she eats enough for 3 men," another voice called out. "No wonder old Whitmore can barely keep his farm running." Sarah's father had died 2 winters ago, leaving her alone with her ailing mother. The small farm at the edge of settlement barely produced enough to survive, and Sarah worked herself to exhaustion trying to maintain it. But the cruel young men of Copper Ridge saw only her sighs, not her struggles. She gathered her courage and stepped into the street, keeping her eyes fixed on the ground. The jeering grew louder. Someone threw a clod of mud that struck her shoulder, spattering across her worn calico dress. Tears threatened to fall, but Sarah refused to give them the satisfaction. "That's enough." The voice cut through the mockery like a blade through butter. Deep, quiet, but carrying an unmistakable edge of danger. The laughter died instantly. Sarah looked up to see a man she had never encountered before, though she had heard whispers about him. He stood well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered and lean, dressed in buckskin clothing that had seen hard use. A long rifle rested casually in the crook of his arm, and a knife hung from his belt alongside various other tools of frontier survival. His face was weathered and bearded, with eyes the color of winter ice that seemed to look straight through a person. James "Ghost" Maddox, the name spoken in hushed tones throughout the territory. A mountain man who trapped beaver in the highest reaches of the Rockies, who had lived among the Shoshone and survived encounters with grizzly bears that would have killed lesser men. He came to civilization perhaps twice a year, sold his furs, bought supplies, and disappeared back into the wilderness like smoke. Thomas Brennan, the ringleader, took an involuntary step backward. His father was the settlement's magistrate, which usually meant Thomas could do as he pleased. But even magistrates' sons knew better than to challenge a man like Ghost Maddox. "We were just having fun," Thomas said, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Fun." Ghost's voice remained quiet, but something in it made the temperature seem to drop 10 degrees. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, closing the distance between himself and the young men. "Let me tell you boys about fun. Last winter I watched a pack of wolves bring down a bull elk. They worked together, wearing it down, biting at its legs until it couldn't stand anymore. Then they tore it apart while it was still breathing. Now that might be fun for wolves, but I don't reckon that elk enjoyed it much." He let the silence stretch, his cold eyes moving from face to face. "You boys remind me of those wolves. Except wolves kill because they're hungry. What's your excuse?" Nobody answered. The crowd that had gathered to watch the entertainment now stood transfixed by the mountain man's quiet intensity. Ghost turned to Sarah, and his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You all right, miss?" Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Up close, she could see the scars that marked his face and hands, badges of a hard life lived on the edge of survival. But his eyes, when they looked at her, held no mockery, no disgust, just simple human decency. Good. He looked back at Thomas and his friends. "Now, I'm going to be in Copper Ridge for 3 days, restocking before I head back up to my trap line. And if I hear about you boys, or anyone else, bothering this young lady, I'm going to be very disappointed." You understand what happens when I'm disappointed." The threat hung in the air, unspoken but crystal clear. Thomas and his companions mumbled hasty agreements and scattered like autumn leaves in a strong wind. Ghost touched the brim of his hat to Sarah. "You take care, miss." Then he was gone, disappearing into Patterson's store, leaving Sarah standing in the muddy street with her heart pounding and her mind reeling. For the first time in months, maybe years, someone had stood up for her. Someone had seen her as a person worth defending. The next morning dawned cold and clear, with frost painting delicate patterns on the windows of the Whitmore farmhouse. Sarah rose before dawn as always, tending to the chickens and the 3 goats that provided milk and cheese. Her mother remained in bed, weakened by consumption that had slowly stolen her strength over the past year. Sarah was drawing water from the well when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her stomach clenched, expecting trouble. But the rider who emerged from the morning mist was Ghost Maddox, leading a pack mule loaded with supplies. "Morning, miss," he called out, dismounting with easy grace. "Hope I'm not intruding." "No, sir," Sarah managed, confused. Can I help you with something?" Ghost gestured to the farm around them, the sagging barn roof, the fence posts leaning at drunken angles, the overgrown garden patch. "Seems to me you could use a hand with some repairs. I've got 3 days before I need to head back to the high country. Figure I might as well make myself useful." Sarah's pride warred with her desperate need for help. Pride lost. We can't pay you much. Maybe some eggs, and didn't ask for payment," Ghost interrupted gently. "Sometimes a man does something because it needs doing. Now, where's your hammer and nails?" Over the next 3 days, Ghost worked with the tireless efficiency of a man accustomed to hard labor. He repaired the barn roof, straightened and reinforced the fences, fixed the door on the chicken coop that had been hanging crooked for months, and even helped Sarah clear the garden patch for winter. He spoke little while he worked, but his silence was comfortable rather than awkward. During brief breaks, he shared stories of the mountains, not the tall tales that frontier braggarts told, but simple observations about the land, the animals, the changing seasons. Sarah found herself hanging on every word, fascinated by this glimpse into a world she had never known. On the second evening, Ghost accepted Sarah's invitation to dinner, a simple meal of cornbread, beans, and the precious ham she'd been saving. Her mother, Margaret, roused herself enough to join them at the table, and Ghost treated her with the same quiet respect he showed Sarah. "You're a good daughter," Margaret said to Sarah after Ghost had left for the night, returning to his camp outside town. "And he's a good man. Rare to find someone who judges by character rather than appearance." Sarah lay awake that night, her mother's words echoing in her mind. In 3 days, Ghost would leave, returning to his solitary life in the mountains. The thought created an unexpected hollowness in her chest. On the 3rd day, Thomas Brennan made his mistake. Sarah had ventured into town for more supplies, dreading the encounter but unable to put it off any longer. She had hoped that Ghost's warning would keep the bullies at bay, but Thomas had spent 3 days nursing his wounded pride and planning revenge. He waited until Sarah emerged from the general store, her arms full of packages. Then he and 4 of his friends surrounded her in the street. "Well, if it isn't the pig girl," Thomas said, his voice loud enough to draw attention. "Your mountain man friend isn't here to protect you today." "Please," Sarah said quietly, "just let me pass." "Let you pass?" Thomas stepped closer, his face twisted with malice. "My father says your ma is dying, that you'll have to sell that worthless farm. Maybe we'll buy it for pennies. Then what will you do? Nobody's going to want a fat ugly." He never finished the sentence. Ghost seemed to materialize out of nowhere, moving with terrifying speed. One moment Thomas was sneering, the next he was flat on his back in the mud, Ghost's hand locked around his throat. The packages Sarah had been carrying lay scattered in the street. "I thought we had an understanding," Ghost said, his voice barely above a whisper. The quiet made it more frightening than any shout. I thought I made myself clear. Thomas gasped for air, his face turning red. His friends stood frozen, afraid to intervene. "Please," Thomas choked out. "Can't breathe." Ghost leaned closer. "Here's what's going to happen. You and your friends are going to apologize to Miss Whitmore. A real apology from your knees. Then you're going to promise, on your father's name and reputation, that you'll never bother her again. And if I ever hear that you've broken that promise, I'll come back. And next time, I won't be nearly so patient. Do we understand each other?" He released his grip slightly, and Thomas sucked in a desperate breath. Ghost stood and hauled the young man to his feet with one hand, then pushed him towards Sarah. Thomas dropped to his knees in the mud, his friends following suit. "I'm sorry," he muttered, not meeting Sarah's eyes. "We're sorry. We won't bother you again, I swear it." "Louder," Ghost commanded, so everyone can hear. Thomas raised his voice, repeating the apology. By now, half the settlement had gathered to watch. Sarah stood trembling, not from fear, but from a complex mixture of emotions she couldn't name. Ghost dismissed the young men with a gesture, and they fled. Then he carefully gathered Sarah's scattered packages, handing them to her with gentle care. "You shouldn't have," Sarah began. "Yes, I should have," Ghost interrupted. "Some lessons need teaching, and some people only understand strength, but that doesn't make it right what they did. And it doesn't make you anything less than you are, a strong, capable woman doing her best in hard circumstances." Sarah felt tears welling up, but this time they weren't tears of humiliation. "Thank you. For everything. For seeing me when others won't." Ghost's expression softened. "I see just fine. Better than most, I reckon. The mountains teach you to look past surfaces, to judge what's real and what's not. Those boys are hollow inside, all swagger and no substance. But you've got steel in you. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." That evening, as Ghost prepared to leave Copper Ridge, Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. She found him at his camp outside town, checking his equipment and loading his pack mule for the journey into the high country. "Take me with you," she blurted out before her courage could fail. Ghost looked up sharply. "Pardon?" "Take me with you, into the mountains." The words tumbled out in a rush. "My mother is dying. The doctor says she has maybe 2 months left. After that, I'll have nothing here. The farm will be sold for debts, and I'll be alone with nowhere to go and nobody to help me. But if I come with you—" "The mountains are hard," Ghost said quietly. "Harder than anything you've known. Winter's coming, and it's brutal up there. Freezing cold, dangerous animals, isolation that can drive a person mad. Most men can't handle it, let alone a fat girl." Sarah's voice turned bitter. "Is that what you were going to say?" "Let alone someone who's never done it before," Ghost finished calmly. "I was judging your experience, not your size. But yes, I'll say it plain. Mountain living requires physical work that would break most people. You'd need to learn trapping, skinning, meat processing, how to read weather and track animals. You'd be walking miles every day in snow up to your thighs. You'd be cold and tired and sometimes hungry. And there'd be no going back until spring." Sarah met his eyes steadily. "I work my farm from dawn to dusk. I've skinned rabbits and chickens, butchered pigs, carried 100-pound sacks of grain. I'm stronger than I look, and I'm not afraid of hard work or isolation. What I'm afraid of is staying here, being ground down by cruelty until there's nothing left of me but anger and bitterness." Ghost studied her for a long moment, his winter ice eyes thoughtful. "What about your mother?" "I'll stay until the end. She has a sister in St. Louis who'll come for the burial. But after that," Sarah's voice wavered but held firm, "after that, I want to live. Really live, not just survive. I want to wake up somewhere where people don't judge me before they know me, where what matters is what I can do, not what I look like." "The Shoshone will judge you," Ghost said, but they'll judge your skills and your character. Same with the other mountain men, the traders, the trappers. It's a different kind of judging, harder in some ways, but cleaner. Honest. That's what I want. Honest. Ghost was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he would refuse. Then he nodded slowly. All right. But understand this, if you come with me, you pull your own weight. No complaining, no quitting when things get hard. The mountains don't care about fairness or second chances. You either learn and adapt, or you die. I'll teach you what I can, but the rest is up to you. I understand. And there's one more thing. Ghost's expression grew serious. People will talk. A young woman traveling alone with a man into the wilderness. They'll assume things. Your reputation will be ruined by civilized standards. Sarah laughed, a sound without much humor. My reputation? I'm the pig girl, remember? I have no reputation to lose. At least in the mountains, I'll be judged by what I do, not what people assume about me. Ghost nodded slowly. Fair enough? Then here's my offer. Stay with your mother until she passes. Use that time to prepare. Get warm clothes, practice with a rifle if you can, build up your strength. When you're ready, send word to Patterson's store. I'll come down from the high country and guide you up to my winter camp. We'll see if you can handle one season. If you can't, I'll bring you back down in spring. No shame in it. But if you can, he paused, his eyes distant, looking toward the mountains. Then maybe you'll have found where you belong. Sarah felt something unfurl in her chest, hope, perhaps, or possibility. I'll be ready. Margaret Whitmore died 6 weeks later, on a cold November morning with the first snow falling softly outside the window. Sarah held her hand as she passed, grateful that her mother's suffering had finally ended. The sister from St. Louis came as promised, handled the burial arrangements, and offered Sarah a room in her household. You'd be doing charity work, Aunt Beatrice explained, her voice kind but her eyes pitying. Helping at the church, maybe working in the kitchens. It's not much, but it's respectable. Sarah declined politely. She had already made her choice. The day after the funeral, she sent word to Patterson's store. 3 days later, Ghost Maddox rode into Copper Ridge, leading a sturdy mountain pony loaded with supplies. You sure about this? He asked Sarah one last time. She looked around at the settlement, at the people who had watched her humiliation and done nothing, at the young men who had made her life miserable, at the buildings that held nothing but painful memories. Then she looked at Ghost, at his honest eyes and weathered face, at the mountains rising purple and white in the distance. I'm sure. They left at dawn, riding west toward the high country. Sarah had never been more than 10 miles from Copper Ridge in her life. Now she was heading into wilderness that most people only heard about in stories. The first week was brutal. They traveled from dawn to dusk, following trails that were barely visible, climbing steadily into higher elevations. Sarah's legs ached, her lungs burned in the thin air, and every muscle screamed in protest. But she gritted her teeth and kept going, refusing to show weakness. Ghost watched her carefully but said little, letting her prove herself through action rather than words. At night, he taught her how to make proper camp, how to build a fire that wouldn't smoke and give away their position, how to read tracks in the dirt and predict weather from the sky. You're doing better than I expected, he admitted on the 8th day, as they stopped to rest beside a rushing stream. Most greenhorns would be complaining by now. Most greenhorns haven't spent years being told they're useless, Sarah replied. I have something to prove. Not to me you don't, Ghost said. Only to yourself. They continued climbing, leaving the last traces of civilization behind. The forest grew thicker, the air colder, the silence deeper. Sarah began to understand why Ghost loved this country. Its raw honesty, its indifference to human concerns, its terrible beauty. On the 10th day, they reached Ghost's winter camp, a sturdy cabin tucked into a valley surrounded by peaks so high they seemed to scrape the sky. It was larger than Sarah had expected, with a solid roof, a stone fireplace, and windows covered with oiled paper. Behind it stood a shed for storing furs and equipment. Built it over 5 years, Ghost explained. Added to it each season. It's not fancy, but it's warm and dry, which is what matters. Sarah explored the cabin with wonder. It was spare, but well organized, everything in its place, everything serving a purpose. No wasted space, no unnecessary decoration. Honest, like the man who built it. "Where do I sleep?" she asked. Ghost gestured to a corner where a raised platform held a pile of furs. "I built that bunk for you before I came down to get you. I'll take the floor by the fire." Over the following weeks, Ghost taught Sarah the skills she would need to survive. How to set trap lines for beaver and marten, how to skin animals without damaging the pelts, how to stretch and cure furs for market, how to track elk and deer through snow, how to butcher meat and preserve it for winter, how to read animal signs and avoid danger. He taught her to shoot his long rifle, patiently correcting her form until she could hit a target at 50 yards. He showed her which plants were edible, how to find water under ice, how to recognize the warning signs of approaching storms. The work was exhausting. Sarah woke before dawn and worked until dark, her hands red and raw despite the bear grease Ghost gave her to prevent frostbite. She fell into her furs each night so tired she could barely move. But slowly, something changed. The constant physical labor began to transform her body. She grew stronger, more capable, more confident. The isolation that might have driven some people mad gave her peace instead. In the mountains, nobody cared what she looked like. What mattered was whether she could do the work, whether she could survive. And she could. Oh, how she could. By midwinter, Sarah could run a trap line as efficiently as Ghost himself. She could skin a beaver in minutes, stretch the pelt properly, identify quality fur at a glance. She could track animals through snow, predict their movements, understand their behavior. She could shoot straight, work leather, butcher meat, and handle herself in the brutal cold. Ghost watched her transformation with quiet approval. More than that, with respect. "You're a natural," he said one evening as they sat by the fire, working on equipment repairs. "I've known men who trapped for years who never learned what you've picked up in months. You have an instinct for it." Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest, and it had nothing to do with the fire. "I had a good teacher." "A teacher's only as good as the student." Ghost paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "Sarah, I want you to know, when I brought you up here, I wasn't sure it would work. Wasn't sure you'd last a month. But you've proven me wrong. You belong in these mountains as much as I do. Maybe more." "Why do you say that?" "Because I came here running away from something," Ghost said slowly. "From civilization, from people, from expectations I couldn't meet. But you? You came here running toward something, toward possibility, toward becoming who you really are. That's a different kind of courage." They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them. Outside, snow fell softly in the darkness, blanketing the world in white. "James," Sarah said quietly. She had started using his real name rather than his nickname months ago. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why did you help me? That day in Copper Ridge, you didn't know me. You had no reason to get involved. But you did." Ghost stared into the fire for a long moment. "My younger sister was heavy," he finally said, "like you. And people were cruel to her, same as they were to you. I was away trapping when she took her own life. She was 14 years old, and she couldn't stand the mockery anymore. I wasn't there to protect her." Sarah's breath caught. "James, I'm so sorry. When I saw those boys surrounding you, tormenting you, I saw her, and I thought, not again. Not if I can help it." He looked at Sarah directly. "But you're not her. You're stronger than she was, strong enough to choose life over death, to choose possibility over despair. That takes courage most people never find. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. She would be proud of you for standing up for someone else. Maybe, I hope so. Ghost cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the emotion. Anyway, that's why I helped, and that's why I'm glad you're here. Spring came slowly to the high country, the snow receding 1 inch at a time. By April, the trap lines were empty. The animals had moved to higher elevations, and it was time to think about returning to civilization to sell their winter's catch. Sarah and Ghost packed the furs carefully, bundles of beaver, marten, and fox pelts worth a small fortune. It had been a good winter, productive and successful. Sarah had proven herself not just capable, but skilled, pulling her weight and then some. We should get good prices, Ghost said, examining the pelts with a critical eye. Quality's excellent, and we've got quantity too. You'll have enough money to do whatever you want. Head to St. Louis, maybe, or Oregon if you're feeling adventurous. Sarah froze in the act of tying a bundle. What do you mean? I thought I was coming back up here with you. Ghost looked uncomfortable. Sarah, you've done well. Better than well. But I don't want to trap you into this life. You've got options now. Money, skills, confidence. You could make a life anywhere. What if I want to make it here? The mountains are my home, Ghost said carefully. Have been for years, but you're young, talented, capable. You could have a real life in civilization. A real life? Sarah's voice rose. You mean a life where people judge me by my appearance? Where I'm expected to be small and quiet and grateful for whatever scraps people throw me? That's not a real life, James. It's a prison. This, she gestured at the mountains around them. This is real. This is honest. This is where I belong. You say that now, but nothing. Sarah stepped closer, her eyes blazing. I've spent 5 months in these mountains. 5 months of the hardest work I've ever done, the coldest nights, the most isolation. And I've never been happier, never been more myself. You taught me to judge by action, not appearance. So look at my actions. Look at what I've done, what I've learned, what I've become. And then tell me I don't belong here. Ghost stared at her, his winter ice eyes searching her face. Whatever he saw there made him nod slowly. You're right, he said. I'm sorry. I was judging by old standards, by civilization's rules. But you're a mountain woman now. If you want to stay, then stay. I want to stay, as your partner. Partners, then. Ghost extended his hand, and Sarah shook it firmly. Equal shares on the furs, equal say in decisions, and next winter we'll trap an even bigger range. They made the journey to Copper Ridge in early May, leading pack mules loaded with furs. Sarah barely recognized the settlement, not because it had changed, but because she had. She sat taller in her saddle now, her body lean and strong from months of mountain work. She wore buckskin clothing similar to Ghost's, practical and durable. Her hands bore calluses and scars, badges of hard work honestly done. Her face was wind-burned and sun-darkened, her eyes clear and confident. When they rode down the main street, heads turned. Thomas Brennan and his friends stood outside the general store, their jaws dropping in shock. They barely recognized the capable, confident woman as the same person they had tormented months ago. Sarah met their stares with calm indifference. They didn't matter anymore. Their opinions, their cruelty, their judgment, all of it was meaningless now. She had found something better, something real. She and Ghost sold their furs for excellent prices, enough money to restock supplies and still have a significant sum left over. Sarah bought a new rifle, a better knife, and quality trapping equipment. She was investing in her future, a future that lay in the high country. On their last night in Copper Ridge, they camped outside town as always. But this time, Sarah felt no sadness about leaving, no sense of loss. This place held nothing for her anymore. "Ready to go home?" Ghost asked the next morning as they prepared to depart. Sarah looked at the mountains in the distance, purple peaks touched with gold by the rising sun. More than ready. They rode west together, partners and friends, heading back to the high country where they belonged. Behind them, Copper Ridge and its judgments faded into memory. Ahead lay the honest mountains, the clean wilderness, the life they had chosen. Sarah smiled. She had left Copper Ridge as a victim, frightened and ashamed. She was returning to the mountains as a trapper, a mountain woman, someone who had found her place and her purpose. The bullies had tried to break her. Instead, they had driven her toward the man and the life that would make her whole. And in the end, that was the best revenge of all, not anger or bitterness, but finding happiness and strength they could never touch. Years later, stories would circulate through the settlements about Ghost Maddox and his partner, a woman trapper who could outshoot most men, run trap lines better than veterans twice her age, and survive winters that would kill greenhorns. Some said she had been saved from a cruel town by the mountain man. Others claimed she had saved herself. The truth, as Sarah and James knew, was somewhere in between. He had given her a chance. She had taken it and made it her own. And together they had built a life of honest work, mutual respect, and quiet contentment in the high country where appearance mattered less than ability, and courage counted for more than conformity. The mountains had taught Sarah what Copper Ridge never could. That worth comes from within, that strength is measured in character, not appearance, and that sometimes the greatest revenge against cruelty is simply living well. She had found her home, her purpose, and herself, and in the end, that was all that mattered.